Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Speak Smart podcast.
Yay.
Today, we're tackling something that can be a real roadblock for English learners.
It can be.
That fear of making mistakes.
It's so common and really holds people back.
And you know, it's funny.
Yeah.
We actually have this awesome podcast episode all about embracing those slip-ups
No, nice.
and turning them into like
using them. Yeah.
using them to your advantage.
To your advantage, exactly.
And I think this is going to be a fascinating deep dive.
Absolutely. I think so too.
So the podcast starts off
Yeah.
with this comparison to babies learning to walk.
It does.
And I got to admit,
Okay.
I'm a little intrigued.
Yeah.
How do babies and English learners connect?
Well, you know, when a baby is learning to walk, they fall down so many times, right?
Oh, yeah. Countless times.
Countless times. But
Yeah.
each time they fall, they're actually adjusting their balance and coordination until they finally get it.
So it's like each fall is actually...
It's part of the process.
Yeah, it's not a failure. It's part of the process.
Exactly. Okay.
It's the same with language.
I see. So does the podcast give any advice on like how to deal with those inevitable stumbles?
It does. It really stresses having what they call a growth mindset,
Okay.
which is basically seeing all these challenges as chances to learn and improve.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
So it's not about avoiding the falls, it's about learning from them.
It's about getting back up.
Exactly.
It also talks about equipping yourself with the right vocabulary.
Okay, so what kind of vocabulary?
Oh, you know, words like mistake, error, like trial and error.
Yeah.
Learn from your mistakes.
Right. Those phrases we use all the time, but maybe don't think about too deeply.
Exactly. And using them helps you to kind of, you know, be more self-aware
Right.
about your progress.
You can actually analyze it.
Yeah, it's like having a toolkit
Oh, I like that.
for understanding your own learning.
Yeah, it's not just about like blindly making mistakes. It's about understanding them.
Yeah, analyzing them and then growing. Now, I know a lot of people,
Yes.
and I'm sure you've encountered this too,
Of course.
get really worried about being judged when they make mistakes.
Especially in front of others.
Especially.
Speaking English in front of others.
Yeah.
You're putting yourself out there.
Exactly. So does the podcast address that at all?
It does, and it's very reassuring.
Okay.
It says that most people are really very supportive
Really?
of those learning a language.
Okay.
They actually admire the effort
Interesting.
and they're willing to help.
Okay, so instead of worrying about what other people are thinking,
Yeah.
we should focus on the fact that most people are actually rooting for us to succeed.
They want to see you succeed.
That's a nice thought.
And that brings us to practicing.
Okay.
The podcast talks about finding a trusted friend or even talking to yourself in the mirror.
Wait, talking to the mirror?
Yeah.
Like actually having a conversation with yourself?
Well, it's a great way to practice in a safe space,
Okay.
a judgment-free zone,
Okay.
you know?
So you're not worried about
No one's watching.
embarrassing yourself.
Exactly. And you get to try different words and phrases and get used to hearing yourself speak English.
That's a really interesting idea because I feel like a lot of people, myself included sometimes, when we hear ourselves speaking another language,
Yes.
it's like, who is that?
You're like, is that me?
Yeah, it feels so foreign.
It's unfamiliar.
Yeah. So this is a way to kind of get comfortable with that.
Yeah, get comfortable with your own voice.
So practice is key.
Yes.
Is there anything else we can do to kind of get more comfortable making these mistakes?
They emphasize immersing yourself in the language.
Okay.
So like listening to music podcasts, watching movies,
So just surrounding yourself with English.
surrounding yourself with the sounds and the natural flow of the language.
Well, I've always wondered this.
Yeah.
When you're listening to something in English
Okay.
and you come across a word you don't know,
Right.
do you think it's better to stop and look it up?
It depends.
Or just keep listening?
It depends on your learning style and goals.
Okay.
If you just want to get the main idea, keep listening.
Yeah.
But if you're really trying to learn new words, then yeah, look it up.
So it's about finding that balance
Exactly.
between maintaining that flow and
And deepening your understanding.
now this is where things get interesting.
Okay.
The podcast talks about turning mistakes into learning opportunities.
It does.
What does that actually mean?
It means you have to shift your perspective.
Okay.
Instead of seeing mistakes as failures, see them as feedback.
Okay.
And they talk about common errors, you know, like verb tense mistakes, confusing similar words, pronunciation issues.
So those little things that can really trip you up.
Those little things that make a big difference.
Yeah.
Like, you know, saying, I ate breakfast yesterday instead of I ate breakfast yesterday.
Oh yeah, the tenses can be really tricky.
Tenses are tricky.
So how do we avoid repeating those errors.
They talk about paying attention to your errors, understanding why you made them, and even recording yourself.
Recording yourself speaking.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
It can be a little scary.
Yeah, to listen back to yourself, but I can see how it'd be helpful.
It's helpful.
So it's almost like having a coach, but it's you.
It's you coaching yourself.
And the podcast emphasizes this idea of self-correction.
Yes.
Not just having someone else point out your mistake,
Well, catching them yourself.
but actually developing that ability to be like, wait,
Yeah,
I messed up there.
exactly.
And that ties into active listening, right?
Active listening, not just to others, but to yourself.
For yourself.
Paying attention to the sounds of English.
So it's about developing a good ear for the language.
Yeah, a good ear.
Okay.
And they tell us to be patient with ourselves.
Oh, that's important.
It's a process.
Because it's so easy to get discouraged
It is.
when you feel like you're not progressing as quickly as you want to.
Yeah. And they also say,
Yeah.
to stay positive,
Right.
they have some inspiring phrases like, I can do this, or every day I'm getting better.
I like that.
They're simple but powerful.
They are. And they really emphasize celebrating small victories,
Oh, yeah.
even mastering a few new words
Yeah.
or having a short conversation.
That's still a win.
That's a win.
And it can be so motivating
It can be.
because sometimes you get bogged down in like, oh, I'm not fluent yet.
You're looking at the big goal.
Yeah. And you forget about all the little steps along the way.
Exactly.
So the podcast really stresses setting small, achievable goals
Yeah.
to avoid feeling overwhelmed.
Instead of trying to become fluent overnight,
Right.
break it down into little steps.
So instead of saying, I'm going to be fluent in a month,
Right.
you could say, I'm going to learn 5 new words today.
Exactly. Or I'm going to use those 5 words in a conversation this week.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, make it realistic.
And fun.
Yeah, make it fun.
Right. Because if it's not enjoyable, then what's the point?
Exactly. They even suggest incorporating your interests into your practice.
Oh, I like that.
So if you like cooking, learn English words about food.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, make it personal.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
We have.
We've learned that making mistakes
Yeah.
is just part of the process.
It's inevitable.
And it's not something to be afraid of.
Embrace those mistakes.
We've talked about ways to overcome that fear of making mistakes.
Finding that trusted friend.
Yeah.
Talking to the mirror.
Practicing.
Yes.
And we've also touched on the importance of consistency.
Yeah.
Finding ways to make learning fun and engaging.
And building that support system.
Building a community around your learning.
Yeah,
This has been incredibly insightful.
it has.
But we're just getting started.
Oh, there's more.
Let's take a quick break
Okay.
and then come back to dive even deeper into this topic.
Sounds good. Welcome back.
All right, so we've been talking about how important a positive mindset is
Yes.
for language learning.
It really is.
And we touched on how practice
Mm-hmm.
and even, putting yourself out there in those real life interactions
Yeah.
can build confidence. But now the podcast takes this really interesting turn
Okay.
and it starts talking about how to actually use your mistakes as a learning tool.
It does.
So it's not just about accepting them.
Let-
It's about like digging
It's about analyzing them.
and understanding them.
Right.
So it's not just about like, oh, I made a mistake, moving on.
Oh,
It's about being like, wait a minute, why did I make that mistake?
exactly.
I like that.
It's like they're valuable clues
Yeah.
about your learning.
Oh,
So the podcast talks about identifying patterns in your mistakes.
okay.
Are you always messing up verb tenses?
Uh-huh.
Do you mix up words that sound alike, or is it pronunciation?
Yeah, those are all
Those are the big ones.
big ones.
So by noticing those patterns, you can really focus your efforts
Okay.
on those areas.
So it's about being strategic.
Exactly. Strategic learning.
And then they take it a step further and
Mhm.
talk about actually analyzing your mistakes.
Yes.
So not just noticing that you made a mistake,
Right.
but understanding why.
The why.
It's almost like you're a detective
And
for your own learning process.
Exactly.
Instead of just seeing the crime scene, you're trying to figure out the motive.
You got it.
Okay. I like that.
So they have this great suggestion,
Okay.
a mistake journal.
Okay, hold on. A mistake journal. What is that?
It's basically a notebook
Okay.
where you write down your mistakes,
Okay.
the corrections, and any insights you have about them.
So you're tracking those errors.
You're tracking your progress,
Okay.
and you can start to see those patterns emerge.
And then hopefully avoid them in the future.
Hopefully avoid them. Exactly.
So it's about taking ownership of your learning.
Yeah.
And the podcast also emphasizes this idea of self-correction.
Yes. Self-correction is key.
So it's not just about having someone else point out your mistakes.
It's about catching them yourself
But like developing that ability to be like, wait,
in the moment.
I made a mistake there.
Yeah, and correct yourself.
But how do you get better at that?
It takes practice.
I can imagine.
It's about active listening.
Okay.
Tuning in to your own speech. Noticing when something sounds a bit off.
Oh, so it's like developing a critical ear.
A critical ear for your own English.
Which can be tough because I feel like when we're speaking, we're so focused on getting the message across.
You're thinking about so many things at once.
We're not necessarily paying attention to the little details.
Right. And they suggest recording yourself.
Oh, recording yourself speaking.
Yeah.
See, I always find that a little daunting.
It can be.
To listen back to my own voice.
But it's revealing.
But I can see how it would be helpful.
It's like an instant replay of your language performance.
Okay.
You can analyze your pronunciation, your grammar.
Everything.
It's like having a personal language coach.
Yeah. But it's you.
It's you.
Now, I think it's also important to acknowledge that making mistakes can be discouraging.
It can be.
Especially when you're not progressing as quickly as you'd like.
Yes. And the podcast reminds us to be kind to ourselves.
Okay.
Embrace the mistakes.
Yeah.
And focus on the progress.
Because it's so easy to get caught up in those moments of like,
the frustration.
Yeah, I'm never going to get this.
I'm not good at this.
But it's about remembering that it's a journey.
Oh, it is a journey.
Not a destination.
Exactly.
So how do we stay motivated then?
They talk about celebrating those aha moments.
Okay.
Like when you finally get a grammar rule.
Yeah.
Or you nail that tricky pronunciation.
Those little victories can be so satisfying.
It can be.
It's like you leveled up.
You leveled up.
In a video game.
Exactly.
And it's about acknowledging that growth.
No matter how small.
Even if it's just like one new word.
One new word is a victory.
Okay. I like that.
And they stress realistic expectations.
Right.
Don't try to do too much too soon.
So instead of being like, I'm going to be fluent by next month.
Right.
Maybe it's, I'm going to focus on this one grammar rule this week.
Exactly. One thing at a time.
And they suggest actually visualizing your progress.
Oh, that's interesting.
So like creating a chart or a graph.
Oh, wow.
To track those milestones.
That's a great idea.
So you can actually see how far you've come.
Yeah, and remind yourself that you're moving forward.
And that can be really motivating when you're feeling discouraged.
Especially when you're feeling discouraged.
Because sometimes you need that visual reminder.
You need that proof.
Of like, hey, I'm actually making progress.
I'm doing this.
Now, the podcast also reminds us that learning a language should be enjoyable.
It should be.
It shouldn't be a chore.
It shouldn't feel like work.
But sometimes it does.
I can.
So any advice on how to make it feel less like work and more like play?
Well, they say incorporate your interests into your learning.
Okay.
So if you love music, listen to English songs. If you like movies, watch English films.
Yeah.
Read English books if you're a reader.
Okay, so find something that you enjoy.
Find something that you're passionate about.
And connect into English.
And you'll learn without realizing it.
That's a good point, because I think sometimes we get so bogged down in like...
the textbooks?
Yeah, the textbooks, the grammar rules.
The rules.
That we forget that language is about communication.
It is.
And it can be fun.
It can be fun.
But I think a lot of people get overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information.
It can be overwhelming.
Where do you even begin?
That's why those small goals are so important. Break it down.
Right.
Focus on one thing at a time.
So instead of saying, I need to learn all the grammar rules, it's, I'm going to master this one tense this week.
Exactly.
Okay.
Be patient with yourself.
Take your time.
You'll get there. It's all about being strategic, being patient, and being kind to yourself.
Yeah.
And they remind us consistency is key.
Oh, consistency.
It's not about those marathon study sessions.
Right.
It's about showing up every day.
Even if it's just for a few minutes.
Even for a few minutes.
It's like making it a habit.
A habit like brushing your teeth. Just a little bit each day makes a big difference.
And find those pockets of time.
Those little pockets of time.
Yeah, like on your commute.
Yeah, listen to a podcast.
Or while you're cooking dinner.
Exactly.
You can listen to something in English.
Make it a part of your routine.
And they also talk about the power of finding a community.
They do. Community is important.
Of other language learners.
Yes, connect with other learners.
So it's not just about like learning by yourself in a vacuum.
No, it's about connecting with others.
Yeah, because sometimes you need that support.
You need that support, that encouragement.
Especially when you're feeling discouraged.
Exactly.
And those communities can also be a great way to find language partners.
They can.
To practice speaking.
Yes.
So to recap this second part of our deep dive.
Right.
We've explored how to turn those mistakes into valuable learning opportunities.
Yes.
So we're analyzing those errors.
Analyzing them.
We're practicing self-correction.
Self-correction is key.
And we're staying positive.
Staying positive.
Focusing on progress over perfection.
Exactly.
We've also discussed the importance of setting those realistic goals.
Realistic goals.
Finding ways to make learning fun.
Make it fun.
Incorporating it into our daily routine.
Yes.
And building that supportive community.
Building that community.
Around our language learning.
Yeah.
And now I'm really excited to move into the final part.
Yeah.
A deep dive.
Where we'll explore how to take all these insights and apply them to real life situations.
Yes.
Focusing on how to build that confidence and fluency.
Okay.
Through practice and interaction.
That's what we're all aiming for, right?
It is the ultimate goal.
All right, so we've talked about shifting our perspective on mistakes and turning them into learning opportunities.
Yeah.
And really digging into why we make those mistakes.
Understanding those errors.
And we've also touched on, the importance of practice and making learning fun.
Making it enjoyable. Yeah.
And creating that supportive environment for ourselves.
Having that community.
But now I'm curious about how we actually take all this knowledge.
Yeah.
And put it into practice in the real world.
Right, because it's one thing to analyze mistakes in a journal or practice with a friend.
Exactly.
It's another thing to be out there using English in real life situations.
Where the stakes feel higher.
Yeah, where you're actually putting yourself out there.
And that's where confidence comes in.
Confidence is key.
The podcast really emphasizes that feeling of, I can do this.
It makes such a difference.
And I can see how it would, because when you feel confident, you're more likely to take risks.
Putting yourself out there.
To not be afraid of making those inevitable mistakes.
Exactly. You're more willing to experiment.
But how do you actually build that confidence, especially when you're still feeling a bit shaky about your English skills?
That's the big question, right?
It is.
And the podcast has some good advice.
Okay.
One of the key takeaways is to start small.
Okay.
Instead of diving into these complex conversations, look for low pressure situations.
So what would those look like?
Oh, ordering your coffee in English. Asking for directions, just greeting someone with a hello.
Those are great examples because those are everyday things.
Everyday interaction.
That we encounter all the time.
Exactly.
And it's a way to practice without feeling overwhelmed.
Without that pressure.
And the podcast emphasizes that those little interactions can be really empowering.
They can be.
Because each time you successfully order your coffee or ask for directions, you're building that sense of, I can do this.
You're proving to yourself that you can do it.
And it chips away at that fear of making a mistake.
Exactly. It becomes less scary.
It does.
And the podcast also talks about role playing.
Oh, role playing. Okay.
Which is basically practicing common conversations with a friend or a language partner.
So like a dress rehearsal.
A dress rehearsal for real life.
I love that.
So you can practice ordering food at a restaurant.
Okay.
Asking for directions.
Yeah.
Making small talk.
Yeah.
Or even having a deeper conversation about your hobbies.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
So you're getting comfortable with the flow of conversation.
You're anticipating those challenges.
Yeah.
You have a safe space to experiment.
And I imagine that having a partner who can give you feedback can make a huge difference.
They can.
Now, even with all that practice and preparation, it can still feel a little intimidating to step outside of your comfort zone.
It can be nerve-wracking.
So do you have any advice for those moments when the nerves start to kick in?
The podcast says be upfront about your language learning journey.
Oh, okay.
Don't be afraid to tell people that you're still learning.
So be honest.
Be honest.
Okay.
Use phrases like, I'm still learning, so please be patient with me. Could you please speak a bit slower?
I like those.
Just acknowledge that you're learning.
And it creates a more supportive environment, I think.
It does. People are generally understanding.
They are.
And you might be surprised by how helpful they are. When you're open about your learning process,
It's like you're breaking down those barriers.
you're connecting on a more human level.
Speaking of connection, the podcast also highlights the importance of finding that community.
Oh, yeah, that community of language learners.
We touched on this earlier.
We did.
And I think it's so crucial to have that network of people who understand your struggles,
Who get it.
who can celebrate your successes,
Celebrate the wins.
and who can offer encouragement and advice.
It's like having a support system.
It really is.
And it's not just about emotional support.
Yeah.
It's also a great place to find language partners.
Yeah.
Share tips and resources.
Mm-hmm.
Stay motivated.
And I imagine seeing other learners make mistakes and progress
Yes,
can be really inspiring
it can.
because it shows you that you're not alone.
We're all in this together.
It's all part of the process.
It's normal to make mistakes.
Now, I think one of the biggest challenges,
Yeah.
especially when you're starting to use English in real world situations, is that feeling of self-doubt,
Oh, that inner critic.
that voice that says, I'm not good enough.
Or I'm going to mess this up.
So how do we silence that inner critic? That's a tough one.
It is.
But the podcast says focus on what you can do,
Okay.
not what you still need to learn.
So celebrate those milestones,
Celebrate the wins.
no matter how small.
Even if you just learned one new word,
It's still a win.
it's still progress.
So shift that perspective
Yeah.
and focus on the positive.
Focus on the positive.
Give yourself credit for the effort.
You're doing great.
It's a journey,
It's a journey, not a destination.
and there will be ups and downs,
There will be bumps along the way
but it's about pushing through those challenges.
and celebrating those victories.
And it's important to remember
Yes,
that even native English speakers make mistakes.
they do.
Remember being human.
It's part of using language.
So be kind to yourself,
Yeah,
embrace those slip-ups,
they're part of the process.
and just keep moving forward.
Keep learning. So as we wrap up this deep dive
Yeah.
into the world of making mistakes while learning English,
I think the biggest takeaway is
mistakes are not the enemy.
they're not
They're actually valuable stepping stones.
stepping stones to fluency.
This has been an incredible journey.
It has been.
I feel like I've gained so much insight into the power of embracing mistakes
Me too.
and using them to my advantage.
It's all about that perspective shift.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of language learning.
It's been a pleasure.
And remember,
Yeah.
every mistake is an opportunity to learn and grow.
Thank you for listening to the Speak Smart podcast.
Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button if you enjoyed this episode.
We'll see you next time.